Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salilo Makwidir. And this morning on the show, on News and Views, we'll be staying with breaking developments in the ongoing war on Gaza. A war that 19 months in has not only decimated lives, but continues to expose the deeply asymmetric dynamics at play between occupier and occupied. On Monday, Hamas released Eden Alexander, a 19-year-old Israeli American soldier, and while the last known living American hostage held in Gaza. The move was described as a goodwill gesture ahead of President Donald Trump's highly politicized visit to the region. But let's be clear, the so-called humanitarian gesture occurs against the backdrop of genocidal violence, systematic erasure, and the weaponization of diplomacy. Meanwhile, the world is witnessing one of the most grotesque moral invasions of our time, where hostage diplomacy garners headlines, yet the daily pulverization of an entire population, well, it's normalized. And as Israel continues to escalate its military operations and continues its illegal occupation, hundreds of Palestinians, many of them children, languish in jails, buried under the rubble, or trapped in a humanitarian nightmare, a human-induced humanitarian nightmare. And joining us now is Professor Jeff Halper. He's the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions and a long-term anti-Zionist and pro-Palestine activist. And we're going to speak excuse me, speaking to him about I think what this all means, the release of Eden Alexander, and why it is touted, I think, as a turning point in this war against the people of Gaza. Prof, thank you so much for joining us on Salam Media. Always a pleasure having you on air. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me again. Good to be here.
Yeah. The pleasures allow us. Prof, the release of Eden Alexander first. Excuse me. Why is it so important? Why is it hailed as a breakthrough? Why is it hailed as a humanitarian gesture? But given the context, there's been mass displacement. There's been starvation and the razing of entire neighborhoods in Gaza. How do we interpret this as a gesture of goodwill, as it has been touted to be?
Well, I think we talked about this before. Trump is introduced into the world of diplomacy and politics, this whole transactional business, real estate model. There's always been transactionalism in the international community, of course, but this has really become dominant. Everything's a deal. So everything we're talking about, war, tragedy, human life, human rights, international law, genocide, the tragedy of people being buried under rubble, and so on, means nothing to Trump and Netanyahu, and more the other world leaders who are beginning to get into this transactional sort of way of dealing with the world, including, of course, the Arab governments. I mean, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are probably the most transactional and businesslike of all the Arab governments and many in the world. So in that kind of a world, there aren't any gestures. There aren't any goodwill gestures. There isn't really even any political thought. Trump wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump wants to make a big deal with Saudi Arabia that has to do with Saudi Arabia investing massively in the United States. And Saudi Arabia, of course, wants nuclear weapons. It wants a defense pact with the U.S. And in that whole mix, Gaza and the Palestinians don't really fit in, except as a nuisance factor. And more, and I think this is the significance of the Edan Alexander deal, Netanyahu is becoming more of a nuisance. In other words, issues like the deal between Saudi Arabia and the United States, or the United States and the Emirates, or dealing with Iran, is much more important than this human tragedy that does not speak to Netanyahu or Trump or MBS, that having to do with the Palestinians in Gaza. And so, in that kind of an equation, you simply make a kind of a decision that, okay, we're going to go ahead and normalize with Saudi Arabia. And that means we have to stop the fighting in Gaza, because Saudi Arabia can't get on with normalization as long as there's fighting in Gaza. And Hamas then has to play the game. Hamas realizes, I think, the transactional nature of all this stuff. So Hamas is also playing the game. All right, you want a goodwill gesture, you want something to signal that we're playing the game. We, Hamas, we're at the table where Netanyahu isn't. So in many ways, they're outplaying Netanyahu on this. Take Edan Alexander. Fine. Now we're at the table. We've done something Trump likes. Trump doesn't like Netanyahu anymore. So it's a really difficult world to deal with because it's so arbitrary. And again, so much a matter of deals that it's hard for us that try to deal with issues of justice and peace and human rights and international law and human life, the sanctity of human life, to deal with it, because these are values that have no meaning whatsoever to the people that are running our region and the people that in many ways are running our world.
Mm, mm, mm. I want to touch on a point that I think you encroached on a bit. When you touched on the Gulf states and the majority of the Muslim, countries in the region.
Mm.
Should we now consider the Gulf states as active enablers of this genocide rather than neutral or passive actors as they've traditionally been regarded as?
I don't know if I would call them active participants in the genocide. I mean, I don't think, they have anything in particular against Palestinians. And certainly, I don't think they would wish a genocide on Palestinians. And I don't think they're very friendly to Israel. I mean, they're not. But but again, it's the more transactional thing. You sit down in the Emirates, you say, well, these are our interests. What should we put aside? What should we progress? Who is expendable? The Palestinians are expendable. MBS said to Blinken, I don't care about the Palestinians, but I have a younger generation that does. So I think their consideration is more, I think many of the Arab, dictators basically are really afraid. They look at what happened to Sadat when he made peace with Israel. So I think they're afraid of the younger generations. I think they're afraid of their own public opinion. And from that point of view, that keeps them a little bit within the Palestinian circle. They can't just throw the Palestinians under the bus. At the same time, they don't really care about the Palestinians, as they say. I guess you could just say that in this larger process of normalization that Trump is going for, there has to be some kind of quiet so that they can normalize. They can't normalize in the middle of a genocide. And from that point of view, they'll advocate for Israel getting out of Gaza. They'll invest their money. Money is, everything they have. They'll invest their money maybe in Gaza, and they'll try to create this kind of a quiet situation where they can go on. So they don't really care about the Palestinians. See, our problem is when we're trying to deal with a national liberation struggle and Palestinians getting their national rights and dealing with decolonizing Palestine and all of that, you don't have the Arab governments behind you because that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in deals. So one day they can be supporting you if it's in their interest immediately, and the next day they throw you under the bus. So it's your question is a great question, and it's a question we're all asking, but there's no answers in this crazy transactional arbitrary world we live in.
Let's touch on Edan Alexander as a profile. Do we know who he is? What was his business? Being in Palestine, being in Gaza, and ultimately, how symbolic is his release in the greater scheme of things?
Well, that shows the power of narrative, and of he's. What you see in the news is, this Israeli American kid from New Jersey. and his parents have been to Congress, and his parents have been to the UN, and this kid that's a hostage for all this time is finally released, and it's a humanitarian gesture and all that stuff. What's missing, of course, from all this is the fact that he's a soldier. He's an American kid. He's not Israeli. He has formal Israeli citizenship. His parents are Israeli, but he was born in the United States. He was raised he's in the army. They called him the Jersey boy. He's from New Jersey, and he finishes high school and decides he wants to join the Israeli army and go fight Palestinians. In other words, here's an American kid who gets up one morning, joins a genocidal army, and goes to participate in genocide. And then somehow we're supposed to be sorry for him. Now, again, the language is important. He's not a hostage. He was a soldier. In international law, oppressed peoples have a right to armed struggle, to free themselves from oppression, and they also have a right to attack soldiers. Soldiers are legitimate targets. He's not a hostage. He's a captive. And in fact, he's not like the civilians that should not have been kidnapped. They were hostages. They are hostages. But he's not a part of the hostage deal. He's a legitimate military captive who can be exchanged, and that happens all the time in wars. It's happened between Ukraine and Russia all the time. He can be exchanged for whatever the different parties agree on. So I think that's the missing piece. Where Israel is really trying to show this all as a humanitarian thing, and of course Israel is the victim because who cares about what's happening in the humanitarian world of the Palestinians in Gaza, and so he fits into that narrative. But it really shows you how distorted everything is when this soldier who was not drafted, just a guy from the United States that decides to participate in a genocide against Palestinians, is seen in this sympathetic way as this poor hostage that's released and everybody's happy. And the worst example, his grandmother was on TV last night here in Israel. She's Israeli, and they're asking about him, and she says, what does every grandmother want? The well-being of their grandson. I'm so happy. I wonder, as a soldier, how many grandmothers this Edan Alexander shot or killed. It's a hard question. 70% of the people killed in Gaza, the civilians killed, the people killed in Gaza are women and children. So it's not a crazy question. How many grandmothers has this kid killed? And, that has to be somehow highlighted in our discussions, and it's hidden pretty much.
No, definitely. One thing that stands out and is making headlines now is United States President Donald Trump in his second term, his first big international trip, he's choosing to go to Saudi Arabia over traditional allies like the UK or the EU. What should we make of this? How should we interpret this? This trip, his first big headline trip, being to Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's even reports that he'll be making his way to Qatar, where there's a big jumbo jet waiting for him as a present. How do you assess all of this?
Again, in the transactional way, I don't think for him, everything is what's best for him and his reputation. So I think deals with the UK or going to Canada or whatever is not going to make any headlines. He promised to end the war in Ukraine, and that's proving harder. So what seems to be easier is the Middle East, ironically, because that's always been the tough thing, because he's got these partners in the Emirates and in Saudi Arabia that are willing to do business. I mean, they're dying to do business with Israel as well as with the United States. And so they speak his language, they're deal makers as well. And I think that's why he came here. I think it's simply easy. There's a lot of money. There's billions of dollars involved. There's great presence like this jet that you've been talking about. They love to wine him and dine him and treat him like a king, and that's the way he sees himself. They will invest in the United States, and there's a good chance that they'll solve the Palestinian issue. Not in any way that we would want, that has to do with, Palestinians aren't even consulted in this normalization process. But as we come to the completion of the Abraham Accords, if Saudi Arabia comes in, then we'll have a situation of apartheid. It'll be a resolution good enough for everybody except the Palestinians. Israel will have all of its settlements, and basically Israel will expand from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. The Palestinians will be locked into a couple little islands on about 15% of Palestine, non-viable, non-sovereign, really in a Bantustan like in South Africa. But that will be the two-state solution. And then normalizing with the Arab world, with the United States, with the international community, and it's over. Normalization is a closure. It's over. Now the Palestinian issue is off the international agenda. Nobody cares anymore, and we move on. So I think that's a great attraction to Trump, and then he gets his Nobel Peace Prize. So I think it's very superficial, very transactional, very immediate kinds of benefits you get out of it. But of course, the Palestinians are the ones that are going to pay the price if we allow this to happen, this normalization process.
Just in closing, Prof, how would you, assess everything that's currently happening right now regarding this genocide? Whether it is the United States of America and the role that they're playing, the Arab nations. I know we touched on it a bit, but just if you could just sum it all up, as we're looking forward to, I think, a very activity-filled second part of 2025.
Well, the big picture, we've talked about this before, is this normalization process. I know I go on and on and on about normalization, but that's how Israel wins. That's how settler colonialism wins. It simply becomes normalized. Everything Israel's done, the Nakba, the taking of Palestinian lands, displacement of Palestinians, genocide, the settlement project where Israel's grabbed all the land of the country, the loss of Palestine to the Palestinians, all that gets buried, and we begin anew with a new normalization in which, again, you have a greater Israel normalizing with the Arab world. And that's the big picture. That's really where this is all going. And like I said, in order for that to happen, the genocide and the military attacks on Gaza have to end. So I think, we're in the last little bit of that. It's a pacification campaign, not only in Gaza, but also in the northern West Bank on the part of the Israeli army, not only to get to soften up Hamas in terms of negotiations, but to break permanently the resistance of the Palestinian people to the colonial project of Israel, and then you can normalize. Then the conditions are right where you can normalize. So our job in the international community of people that do care about Palestinians and human rights and everything else that are not transactional, our job, I think, is to stop the normalization process. We have to call it for what it is. And the problem is normalization is such a gray, dry academic term that nobody pays attention to it. The Palestinians aren't paying attention to it. But this is the scenario. This is the end game. We're in the end game. The genocide in Gaza will end, I think, relatively soon, in order to be able to progress the Abraham Accords and the normalization. So all these things, we call it genocide. And we mourn the human cost of that. For Israel and Trump and MBS, it's a tactic, and it's a tactic that you can continue, not continue. How many Palestinian lives are lost is irrelevant, and that's the kind of a world we have to fight. I think certainly Muslims with their values, should begin to put pressure on these Arab countries not to become so transactional, and to go back a little bit to their religious values and their cultural values. That wouldn't be bad. But politically, we have to fight this process of normalization and call it for what it is, a process of genocide and of apartheid. And we need to really mount a campaign against normalizing Israeli apartheid. That's the call of the day. Unfortunately, we're not very organized. And so whether we can really meet that task of the moment remains to be seen.
No, definitely. We're going to the video for now. Prof, always a pleasure chatting to you. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time. And yeah, hope to catch up soon again.
All right, we'll meet again soon.
There you go.
Thanks.
That is Professor Jeff Halper. And yeah, I think very, very important points that he's touching on the process of normalization, particularly the Gulf states. I mean, it's quite shocking if you can just look at the excitement of Donald Trump's visit to the Gulf states. And, you know, they've rolled out the red carpet essentially for him, ready to do all of these big business deals with the man at the heart of a genocide, essentially. I mean, Qatar promising a big jumbo jet as a gift to him, and it raises a lot of questions. You know, does is normalization the next phase of this, as Professor Jeff Halper mentions? Is it the end game? The normalization of ties with Israel and all of their allies and partners who are complacent in this genocide. So it'll be interesting to see how the latter part of 2025, the second half of 2025, pans out with all of these things happening. Abdul Shabalala, we see your comments on air. Skeniski 49, we see your comments. Abdul Razak Ishmailov, as always, we appreciate you guys' engagements and comments. Keep them coming. You know, keep the conversations going. What do you make of Edan Alexander, 19-year-old kid from New Jersey? Apparently, you know, his name seems to matter more than Palestinian prisoners who continue to remain nameless. He has been the headliner. He's been touted to be a game changer to this genocide. He's touted to be a turning point. And I'm just thinking, only one person, only one life, one American Israeli life. That's enough, you know, to be a turning point for this. But the most important question we should be asking ourselves is, um, this was a soldier essentially. You know, this was someone who finished school, went to military training with one intention and one intention only, which was to be part of a genocidal army to wipe off the people of Gaza from the face of the earth. And now there seems to be this campaign where everyone else needs to feel sorry for him. You know, this is a kid from New Jersey, you know, American, and apparently his life should be more valued than the thousands and thousands that are still in Gaza at this current moment. Really, really interesting stuff. You can engage with us on our various social media platforms, as I mentioned. You can give us a call. Our line, our studio line is 011 On WhatsApp, you can text us or send us a voice note on 061 and you can engage with us on our various social media platforms, and you can share your thoughts about this and all the other conversations that we're currently having on News and Views. It's still, 9:35, so we still have a lot more to touch on. You can keep it tuned, keep it locked into Salam Media. We'll be with you after the short break.